Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I am pleased to be joined by Kristin Stephens, who is a Navy spouse, a Navy veteran spouse, and she currently serves as the Assistant Director of Experiential Learning at Old Dominion University here in Virginia. Hi, Kristin.
Hey, Sue. Happy to be here. How are you?
Good. And I'm so happy you're here because I love chatting with you about your experiences in Okinawa because we have that in common. And then to find out that you also know Kaylin. And it's so cool because I think it's so neat that not only do we have military spouses doing cool things in academia, but you guys have kind of like formed this little good old boys network where, you have each other to lean on. I thought that was really cool because you guys don't even share a service branch. Kaylin's husband was Marine Corps, your Navy, you have the Okie connection. And I know she serves on your nonprofit board, but I thought it was so cool because I know that when I started off, I'm a couple years in front of you guys. I know when I started off, it was so difficult finding professional military spouses, period. Never mind finding military spouses in my career field. But I think it's so cool that you guys have found each other. So I want to talk about that a little bit later. But let's get into like your highlight because when I read your story, I just thought it was fascinating that you were able to fund your educational goals. I mean, we talked about how you're going to get ready to start your PhD here very soon, but you've been able to fund your educational goals very effectively while moving around in military lifestyle. Do you have any tips for military spouses regarding connecting to funding opportunities and finding the right fit?
Yeah, I think you really have to be proactive and you have to be the one to go out there and look for them because generally it's not going to just magically fall into your lap. So I think the proactivity and being strategic is really important, and you have to be flexible and you have to really take the need for flexibility into consideration. So one of my values is love of learning, but my background is also in financial counseling. So for me, it's always been that struggle and balance of, fulfilling my need to always be learning and pursuing education and not taking on student debt, not overextending ourselves financially in order to do that. So another aspect of that is, PCSing. So my bachelor's degree, my first master's degree, we PCSed one or more times during that process. So part of my planning was, what programs are flexible for me to be able to finish this program so I'm not having to transfer to a different college, a different university every time that we move. So what that looked like was finding programs that had online courses that could move with me, from Washington State to Japan. In terms of funding, the first thing I do is I look at whatever school that I'm considering to see what military related options do they have. So sometimes that might mean that they have discounted tuition for military spouses, or they're going to provide in-state tuition for military spouses, because just being able to knock that tuition price down really adds up on those savings. And then I look at the government program. So I've taken advantage of almost everything out there that I can find. So when I first started, my CAA was able to cover a good chunk of my master's degree. I actually started out as a graduate certificate program, and that's what I used my CAA to fund. And then I was able to transfer those credits into my first master's. I've used a semester of post 9/11 GI Bill, and that's how I finished that master's program. And then I have also looked at military related scholarships. So I think one thing that a lot of us forget about is I think sometimes we go on Google and we just, type in scholarships or military scholarships. But most of the time there's going to be local organizations, either on your base or in your surrounding community, that have scholarship programs, but they're not necessarily going to show up at the top of Google. So I always encourage every spouse to take the time to look within their community, again, whether that's on or off base, because I have been able to take advantage of scholarships that are within the local community. It was actually really neat because we were talking about how I've been in Okinawa twice now. And the first time that I was there, I applied for a scholarship as, a Navy spouse. And then when I went back 10 years later, I was able to pay it forward because I actually ended up chairing that same scholarship committee. So it was just a really unique opportunity to have been able to get that scholarship, utilize it to get my degree, and then be able to turn around and then pay it forward to other spouses. But that's definitely really what I like to encourage people to do, is look for those scholarship opportunities. And then I've been fortunate enough to have found employers that also provide either discounted tuition or tuition reimbursements. And that really goes a long way as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And when we were stationed in Germany, I did the same thing where I applied for a scholarship or a grant through the Air Force Aid Society. And it was really interesting because I think my husband's rank was too high to make us eligible for it. But what I went in there, I spoke to them and they're like, oh, don't not apply for it
Right.
because of that. Because if no one else takes the money, we have the wherewithal to like consider other applicants. So it was interesting that, we sometimes disqualify ourselves because we're like, oh, we're not eligible. But they're like, no, 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 apply. We're not guaranteeing you'll get the money, but there's a pool of money. And if nobody takes it, of course, we'll consider other applicants. And
Mhm.
so,
I love that. That's fantastic. And it's true, like you really do have to advocate for yourself. And I think you're right that we do sometimes have these self-imposed barriers that we put up. And I always like to say, and I'm always trying to remind my kids that if you don't try, it's a definite no.
right, right.
But if you try, there's a chance. And
Yeah.
it's sometimes there's those scholarships because I've served on a few different scholarship committees. And sometimes we're struggling to find applicants. So,
Right.
like you said, like the worst thing you can do is ask.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
never know.
And I was happy and I was lucky that they were proactive because I wasn't. I was timid. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to take it away from somebody else. And they're like, you're not taking it away from someone else. If someone
Mhm,
else applies, we will give it to them. But if no one else applies, you're eligible. And so,
mhm.
yeah, that taught me a great lesson. Like, don't, don't make the buying decision for them. Like, if they're not saying no, why are you saying no?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think part of it too comes down to just the flexibility that we have to have, the Gumby likeness as a military spouse, where, what school you go to might be different. Based on your situation. The timeline of getting your degree might be a little bit different. But I think if trying to get that education without breaking the bank is an important to you, there's ways around doing that.
Right.
I went ahead and got a second master's degree and am finishing up a third master's degree because of my, I know, because my previous employer had such great tuition benefits that it barely cost me anything to pursue.
Sure.
And because I love learning, I'm always happy to just be taking classes. I know not everybody is wired that way. But, so I'll end up with 3 masters with very little out of pocket expense just from being
I'm
strategic about it.
exhausted just thinking of that. Like exhausted.
I
But
work in higher ed though, so I just love being
yeah,
surrounded by
it gives
education.
you credibility. No, so I also loved hearing about, when we were chatting, you were talking about how it's so challenging to, because you're the assistant director of experiential learning for a university, a brick and mortar university. That is not a small thing. And I love that you were saying that your volunteer work as a military spouse actually made you competitive for the position. So can you share a little more about the role of strategic volunteering in your career trajectory and or the value of like strategic volunteering to military spouse careers in general?
Yeah,
I
definitely.
hope you do both.
Yeah. So obviously education is very important, but what employers are really looking for is they're looking for experience. And that can be hard to get sometimes. But I think a lot of people don't really take into consideration the benefit of volunteering for the person who's doing the volunteering. I love giving back. You have that wonderful glow that you feel when you've made a difference. And that's really, I think, what drives people to volunteer is just that feeling of, again, making that positive impact. But there's a lot of other benefits that volunteers get out of those experiences. So I think one of the keys is just to be strategic about what it is that you are trying to do with your career path. And look at what skills that you need, what experience you need, what networks you could develop, and then look for volunteer opportunities in your community that might line up for that. And sometimes it's not a perfect lineup. And I think that, it's important to remember that careers are kind of an umbrella and there's not a linear path for any one person. And sometimes maybe volunteering somewhere that doesn't perfectly line up with what your career goals are still going to give you those soft skill experiences. It's going to give you leadership experience. It's going to give you project experience. Maybe if you're interested in education, so for instance, for me, one of the places that I volunteered at was at a museum. And that may not necessarily seem relevant to what I'm doing right now, but I was able to help them with their education programs. So I learned a lot about project management and figuring out how to do that hands-on learning component, which rolls right into what I'm doing now with, again, managing that experiential learning, hands-on project-based learning development for our students. But definitely taking the opportunity to look at what organizations are in your area and just start connecting with them to see what it is that you can do to support their mission while you're also growing as an individual. When I was with Okinawa Leadership Seminar, which we were talking about a little bit earlier, I was able to help plan 3-day leadership conferences. It was a volunteer position, but it's the equivalent of, a reasonably high-level project management where you're coordinating conferences and workshops. And I was able to just take that right into what I'm doing now.
No, that's very cool. And then you also mentioned that mentors played a big role in your trajectory. And we talked about it last week during our summit because our final panel was all about networking effectively in every situation. And one of the questions I asked the panelists was, how do you even find mentors and sponsors, right? Because military spouses are also always frustrated. Like they understand the value of having mentors and sponsors, but it can be frustrating trying to connect with them. So how did you connect with your mentors?
So I think every mentorship experience I've had has been a little bit different, and some have been more formalized and some have been a little bit more informal. But I think a lot of it comes down to a self-awareness of your own self and understanding, where your areas of growth are. And again, the goals that you have for your future so that you can kind of identify what it is that you're looking for in a mentor. And what I found over the years is that those needs change because we as people change, right? Our circumstances change, our goals adjust as we move along. And I think it's just putting yourself into those spaces where you're connecting with like-minded people that can support you in your goals. And again, just knowing what it is that you're looking for in that moment can be really, really impactful. Sometimes it can be very informal and it's just, hey, can we have a couple of coffees so that I can just pick your brain about, how you've gotten to where you are right now. And other times it can be a much more formalized, we're going to meet a couple of times a month over the period of several months or a year to work on whatever specific issue it is that you're looking at trying to grow in. For instance, if you are wanting to improve on public speaking, connecting with a mentor that is a good public speaker that's regularly in those areas, whether it's, presenting workshops or classes and connecting and saying, hey, I really want to improve my public speaking. Would you be willing to help? And, finding organizations like OLS or LES can definitely be a great place to find those public speakers. And then they can help you connect with opportunities. So as you're sitting down with them and they're giving you input, maybe they can connect you with, hey, I have a workshop coming up. Would you like to co-host with me? And kind of helping you dip your toes in and help you grow in those skill areas. But it really does come down to the self-awareness of knowing what it is that you are looking for.
Yeah, and I remember one of the things that one of our speakers mentioned, and it's one of those duh, like once you hear it, you're like, I should have figured that out. But she's like, you're never gonna find your mentor or your sponsor in the rooms that you're currently in with your peers, because you need to get into rooms where you're with people who are like 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of you in your career.
Right.
And that's where the magic happens. And then they
Mhm.
said they're like, the only way to do that is to really expand your network by going to events. And so I
Definitely.
thought that was, and so I thought that was really insightful because I think a lot of us just do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. And she's like, no, you have to get out of your comfort zone
Mhm.
and actually get into these rooms where your future mentors or future sponsors are.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Yeah, that's
So
so
I know,
true.
yeah. So I know that you guys just went through the transition, which I actually did not know before this, before today, but that's so cool. And so like, I guess with the benefit of very recent hindsight, is there anything that you would say, as encouragement or like, share a pitfall or a cautionary tale with people who are, military spouse career, living the life, or people who are about to transition, whatever it is there anything that you would love to leave as a closing thought?
Yeah. So, with my husband having just retired this summer, everybody always tells you when you're a parent, oh, the kids grow up so fast, appreciate every moment. And you're like, oh, my baby is screaming. I don't want to hear this right now. So I hate to be that person, but I feel like when you're in the thick of it as a military spouse, you can get caught up in the frustrations and see the negative sides of, for instance, from a career perspective. I love my job and, I might be in line for a promotion and now we have to PCS. And
Right.
now I have to hit the reset button, have to start all over. And maybe you PCS and your exact job or career track isn't available. And I think it's really easy to get caught up in that frustration and negativity. But now that I'm on the other side of it and we're a little bit more, I've had time to reflect, the amount of change that we go through as a military spouse, I think really allows us to be incredibly adaptable. And I think that I've seen that a lot in my positions as we've progressed through our military career in terms of my flexibility, my ability to just jump into a situation and figure it out. And the amount of skills and experience that I bring to the table now is fantastic. Every time that I've had to start over, it's really given me an opportunity to learn how to either work with a new group of personalities or leadership styles. It's given me a more diverse network. It's put me in positions and rooms and on projects that I never would have been able to experience before. And even if sometimes you don't see the direct correlation to your, long-term career goal, those skills are valuable. And, every position that you go to next, you're just continuing to build and build and build. And I think sometimes we lose sight of, yes, somebody can be at a company for 20 years and they're able to rise up the ranks, but they're kind of siloed within that company and that job title, and they're missing out on the opportunity to have those growth experiences. So I really do think it's just focusing on the skills that you're gaining, the opportunities that are being given to you. I mean, we're all going to have that moment where we're, sad that we're having to move and start over. I don't want to minimize that. It's rough. But then just, you've got to look and say, okay, where am I going? What opportunities are there? It could be a job, it could be volunteering, but there's always ways to, grow your skills, fill those resume gaps, and really try to find opportunities to connect with your community and grow that network.
So it's like a glass half full approach because
It is.
it's going to happen anyway. You're going to PCS anyway. So it's almost like
Mhm.
whether you're resilient and you jump up faster. I mean, because we all know it does suck. We're not saying that
Mhm.
it doesn't
Yeah,
suck. It
it
sucks.
does.
Absolutely
It
sucks.
does.
As someone who, started their career like 14 years late, it
Mhm.
sucks.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's going to happen anyway.
Mhm.
And like looking for the next opportunity. And I think also to what you said, arming yourself with the information about resources available to you. Because I've talked to so many spouses who, when moving overseas, they didn't realize that there were so many benefits that they needed to take advantage of before they moved overseas. So I guess it's like you're saying, like make the best of it, but also understand what you have available to you. I
Yeah,
love that.
definitely.
Great.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's just look at what you have available, like what you just said, and just embrace it and go from there. I got started in financial counseling because I started out volunteering at Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. Then I became a FINRA fellow to get my financial counseling accreditation, and kind of went from there. And while I've since transitioned out of a counseling focused role, the events and the teaching and the counseling experience directly, rolled right into what my new position is.
So it's still very worthwhile experiences
Definitely.
that were useful in your future
Mhm.
jobs.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do here at ODU, we're the Center for Career and Leadership Development. So they do career coaching. Well, my counseling background in finance actually was pretty relevant to career coaching and counseling. So I was able to get my certification on the career side pretty easily once I started, because so much of that was really, really relevant. And what you're doing is just a slightly different, topic.
I love it. So you're practicing what you preach.
Yes, trying to.
You're living it, you're walking the talk. So thank you so much, Kristin, for sharing your time with us. And for those of you joining us, thank you so much. And if you have a story to share, we would love to hear about it. I want to thank our friends at USAA for making these conversations possible. And I will say thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.